Montana Territory, 1875. The unforgiving winter wind cut through the valley like a knife, but Levi Irwin barely noticed the cold anymore. At 25, his hands were already calloused from years of hard labor, his eyes carrying the weight of a man twice his age. As he stood on the ridge overlooking the sprawling ranch lands below, he pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his lean frame and watched his breath crystallize in the frigid air. No sense in getting attached to anything out here, he muttered to himself, a mantra that had served him well these past 3 years. The Montana frontier had taught him that lesson the hard way when his first attempt at building something permanent, a modest cattle operation with his older brother, had ended with Thomas in a pine box after a rustler's bullet. Since then, Levi had drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season, keeping his distance from anyone who might try to reach past the walls he'd built. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Mr. Donovan, the ranch owner, riding toward him. "Got word from town," Donovan called out, his breath visible in the cold. "Stage is delayed by the weather, but they'll be pushing through tomorrow. Need you to ride in and meet my niece. She's coming to help with the house and the books." Levi nodded, though inwardly he bristled at the task. Towns meant people, questions, the chance of recognition. But he needed this job, at least until spring thaw when he could move on again. "Sure thing, Mr. Donovan," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. "First light." "First light," Donovan confirmed before turning his horse back toward the main house. As Levi watched the older man ride away, that familiar restlessness stirred within him. 3 months at the Donovan ranch was already pushing his limits. The longer he stayed in one place, the more dangerous things became, for him and anyone foolish enough to get close. Out here, a man with a past was just asking for trouble, and Levi had learned that surviving the frontier meant staying unattached and ready to ride at a moment's notice. The next morning, Levi rode into Clearwater, a growing but still modest settlement nestled in the valley. Despite the previous day's delay, the stagecoach was running behind schedule again. He hitched his horse outside the general store and stepped inside to wait, nodding curtly to the shopkeeper. "Coffee's fresh if you're interested," the man offered, gesturing to a pot on the wood stove. Levi accepted with minimal conversation, then positioned himself by the window, watching the street with practiced vigilance. An hour passed before the distinctive rumble of the stagecoach finally echoed through town. He drained his cup and stepped out onto the boardwalk, squinting against the late morning sun. The coach came to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver immediately began unloading luggage. The door swung open, and a young woman emerged, her movement graceful despite the obvious fatigue of long travel. Levi found himself staring longer than he intended. Hannah Forrester was 22, with golden blonde hair peeking out from beneath a modest blue bonnet that matched her traveling dress. Her complexion was fair but kissed by the sun, suggesting she was no stranger to the outdoors. What caught Levi off guard, however, were her eyes, a clear, determined green that surveyed her surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Mr. Irwin," she called, spotting him on the boardwalk. "Uncle Edward said you'd be meeting me." Levi cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his dusty appearance. "Miss Forrester, your uncle sent me to escort you to the ranch." He moved forward to help with her luggage, deliberately maintaining a respectful distance. "I appreciate that," she replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Though I should tell you, I'm quite capable of riding on my own. I didn't come all this way to be treated like delicate china." The statement caught him by surprise. Most Eastern ladies he'd encountered viewed the frontier as a primitive hardship to be endured rather than embraced. "Never suggested otherwise, ma'am," he responded, loading her trunk onto the wagon he'd brought. "But your uncle would have my hide if I didn't see you safely to the ranch." She smiled then, a genuine expression that momentarily transformed her travel-worn features. "Well, we wouldn't want that. I've heard he's quite fond of you. Says you're the best hand he's had in years, despite your determination to move on come spring." Levi stiffened. He didn't appreciate being discussed, especially his coming and going. "Your uncle talks too much," he said flatly, offering his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. To his surprise, she laughed. "Yes, he does. It's his most endearing quality." She accepted his assistance but required little help, settling herself on the seat with practiced ease. As they left town behind, the vast Montana landscape opened before them, snow-capped mountains in the distance, rolling hills dotted with pine, and open grasslands where Donovan's cattle would graze come spring. Hannah's eyes widened at the sight, and Levi found himself watching her reaction from the corner of his eye. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she said softly. "It's harsh land," he countered. "Beautiful, yes, but it'll kill you quick if you don't respect it." She turned those green eyes on him fully. "Is that why you don't get attached? Fear of the harshness?" Levi's hands tightened on the reins. "I don't recall offering my life story for discussion, Miss Forrester." "No, you didn't," she agreed easily. "But I find that people who work so hard to keep others at a distance usually have the most interesting stories." Before Levi could formulate a response, the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the landscape. His body reacted on instinct, one arm pulling Hannah down low on the seat, the other reaching for the rifle stored beneath it. His eyes scanned the surroundings with practiced precision. "Stay down," he ordered, all pretense of casual conversation gone. Two riders appeared on the ridge to their right, moving fast toward them. Levi recognized the lead rider immediately, Jeb Harker, a local troublemaker with a reputation for harassing travelers. "That's far enough, Harker," Levi called out as the men approached, his rifle aimed steadily. Harker pulled his horse to a stop, smirking beneath his unkempt beard. "Well now, if it ain't Donovan's pet drifter. We're just being neighborly, making sure the lady arrived safely." His eyes slid to Hannah with undisguised interest. "She's arrived fine. Your neighborly duties are complete," Levi replied coldly. "Now ride on." The second man shifted nervously. "Come on, Jeb. That's Edward Donovan's niece. We don't need that kind of trouble." Harker hesitated, then spat on the ground. "Another time, then." He tipped his hat mockingly toward Hannah. "Welcome to Montana territory, ma'am. Not all of us are as unfriendly as your escort here." Only when the riders were well out of sight did Levi lower his rifle. He glanced at Hannah, expecting to find her terrified. Instead, she was sitting upright again, her face composed despite the slight paleness of her cheeks. "Does that happen often?" she asked calmly. "Often enough," Levi replied, setting the wagon in motion again. "The laws spread thin out here. Men like Harker take advantage." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then it's fortunate I'm not traveling alone." After a pause, she added, "Thank you, Mr. Irwin." "Just doing my job," he said automatically, but something in her steady gaze made him uncomfortable. She'd shown neither hysteria nor helplessness, reactions he'd come to expect from women facing frontier danger. Instead, she'd remained calm and clear-headed, qualities that were dangerous to notice in someone he'd be living and working alongside for the next few months. By the time they reached the Donovan Ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Edward Donovan emerged from the main house, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile at the sight of his niece. "Hannah," he called, striding forward to help her down from the wagon. "Thank God you've arrived safely." "Uncle Edward." She embraced him warmly. "Your Montana is exactly as magnificent as your letters described." As Levi unloaded her trunk, he overheard Donovan's lowered voice. "Was the journey difficult? Did Levi take good care of you?" "We had a small encounter with some men. Harker, I believe, was the name." "Mr. Irwin handled it admirably," she replied. Donovan's expression darkened. "Harker again? That man is becoming a problem." He glanced over at Levi with newfound appreciation. "Thank you for protecting her." Levi nodded uncomfortably. "Just happened to be there, sir." "Nevertheless," Donovan insisted, "I'm grateful. Now, let's get Hannah settled. Supper will be ready soon, and you'll join us, Levi." It wasn't a request, and Levi knew better than to refuse his employer. Still, as he carried Hannah's trunk inside, he couldn't help feeling that something fundamental had shifted. For 3 years, he'd managed to keep his distance, to remain detached, and ready to move on when necessary. But something about Hannah Forrester's clear-eyed gaze and steady composure had caught him off guard. "Dangerous," he muttered to himself as he set the trunk down in the room prepared for her. Getting involved with the boss's niece, or anyone, for that matter, was a complication he couldn't afford, not with his past still dogging his heels. The following weeks brought an unexpected rhythm to the ranch. Hannah proved herself far more capable than anyone anticipated. She took over the household accounts with efficient precision, implemented new systems for tracking cattle and supplies, and even helped with some of the lighter ranch work when hands were short. More surprising to Levi was how quickly she earned the respect of the ranch hands. Not through authority, but through her willingness to learn and her genuine interest in their work. Levi found himself watching her more often than he cared to admit. The way she helped Mrs. Cooper, the ranch cook, preserve the last of the winter stores. How she insisted on learning to ride Western style rather than side saddle. The quiet moments when she would stand on the porch at dusk, taking in the vast Montana sky with an expression of peaceful wonder. One bitter cold afternoon in late February, Levi was repairing a section of corral fence when Hannah approached carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Mrs. Cooper thought you might appreciate some coffee," she said, offering one of the mugs. Levi accepted it with gloved hands. "Thank her for me." "I will." Instead of leaving, Hannah leaned against the fence post, watching him work. "You're good at that. Building things." He shrugged. "Simple necessity out here. Is that why you keep moving from place to place?" Necessity. The question was direct, but her tone held no judgment, only curiosity. Levi drove another nail into the post with more force than necessary. "Some men aren't meant to put down roots." "I don't believe that," she replied. "I think some men convince themselves they shouldn't have roots because they're afraid of what happens when the wind comes to test them." He set down his hammer and turned to face her fully. "You've been here barely a month, Miss Forster. Don't presume to understand a life you haven't lived." Her cheeks colored slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "You're right. I apologize." She pushed away from the fence. "Enjoy your coffee, Mr. Irwin." As she walked away, Levi felt an unfamiliar twist of regret. Her observation had struck too close to truths he'd worked hard to bury. It wasn't fear that kept him moving, it was survival. The last time he'd allowed himself to care about something, to build something permanent, it had ended with a grave on a windswept hill and a price on his head for a crime he hadn't committed. That evening at supper, Hannah was notably quiet, focusing on her plate rather than engaging in her usual conversation. Donovan, oblivious to the tension, chatted about spring preparations and his plans to expand the herd. "We'll need to start the roundup earlier this year," he was saying. With the new grazing lands to the north, he was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. One of the younger ranch hands, barely 18 and wide-eyed with alarm, burst in without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Donovan, sir. Riders coming. Looks like Harker and his boys, and they're carrying torches." Donovan was on his feet instantly. "How many?" "6 or 7, sir." Levi was already moving, retrieving his rifle from by the door. "Get Miss Forster to safety," he told Donovan. "I'll gather the men." Hannah stood, her face pale but determined. "I can help. I know how to shoot." "This isn't up for discussion," Levi said sharply. "These men are drunk and looking for trouble. You'll stay inside." For once, she didn't argue, recognizing the gravity in his tone. Donovan nodded, grabbing his own shotgun from above the fireplace. "Be careful, Levi," Hannah called as he headed for the door. "Please." The concern in her voice caught him off guard, and he paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "Always am," he replied, the closest thing to a promise he could offer. Outside, Harker and his men had reached the edge of the property. True to the young hand's warning, they carried torches and were shouting incoherently, clearly emboldened by liquor and malice. Levi positioned the ranch hands strategically, their rifles trained on the approaching riders. When Harker was within earshot, Levi stepped forward, his own weapon ready. "That's far enough," he called. "Turn around and ride out, Harker. You're outnumbered and outgunned." Harker swayed in his saddle, the torch in his hand casting eerie shadows across his face. "Well, if it ain't the drifter, playing protector. We just came to welcome the pretty Eastern lady properly. Donovan's been keeping her all to himself." "Last warning," Levi responded coldly. "Leave now, or we start shooting." Harker's face contorted with sudden rage. "You don't give orders around here, Irwin. You're nothing but a hired gun, a wanted man playing cowboy." The words hit Levi like physical blows. Harker knew. Somehow, he knew about the bounty in Wyoming. He felt the ranch hands' confused glances, sensed their sudden uncertainty. Before Levi could respond, a shot rang out from behind him, not aimed to hit, but close enough to Harker's horse to send the animal rearing in panic. Harker dropped his torch as he struggled to maintain control, and several of his men did the same, their mounts spooked by the sudden chaos. Levi turned to see Hannah standing on the porch, a rifle in her hands, and a look of fierce determination on her face. "The next one won't miss," she called clearly. "Get off our land." The confidence in her voice, the simple claim of our land, seemed to sober Harker momentarily. He looked from Hannah to the armed ranch hands, then to Levi's unwavering aim. "This ain't over," he spat, but he was already turning his horse. "Especially for you, Irwin. Folks around here might be interested to know who they're harboring." As Harker and his men retreated, Levi felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. His time at the Donovan ranch was coming to an end sooner than he'd planned. He'd have to leave, tonight, if possible. He turned to find Hannah still on the porch, the rifle now lowered, but her eyes fixed on him with questions he couldn't answer. She'd heard Harker's accusations. They all had. "Everyone back to your posts," Donovan ordered the hands, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Double the watch tonight. I want to know if those fools come back." As the men dispersed, Donovan approached Levi. "We should talk," he said quietly. Inside, Hannah was waiting in the kitchen, her earlier bravado replaced by a tense vigilance. She set the rifle aside carefully, her hands steady despite everything. "Uncle Edward, I apologize for disobeying, but I couldn't just." Donovan waved off her explanation. "You may have saved us from a fight we didn't need. I'm not angry." He turned his attention to Levi. "But I think Mr. Irwin here owes us some answers." Levi stood stiffly by the door, already calculating his escape route, how quickly he could retrieve his few possessions and be on the road before anyone could stop him. "There's nothing to explain," he said flatly. "Harker's drunk and talking nonsense." "Is he?" Donovan asked, his expression grave but not accusatory. "Because the way you're standing tells me there's at least some truth to what he said." Hannah moved closer, her green eyes searching his face. "Levi, whatever it is, we can help. But you have to trust us." The earnestness in her voice almost broke his resolve. For a moment, he could almost imagine what it would be like to stay, to explain, to be understood rather than judged. But that was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. "I appreciate what you've done for me," he said, addressing Donovan while carefully avoiding Hannah's gaze. "I'll collect my things and be gone by morning." "That's not what I'm asking," Donovan replied firmly. "I'm asking for the truth. 3 years you've worked ranches in this territory, moving on before anyone gets close. You're the best hand I've ever employed. Hard-working, honest in your dealings, fair with the men. Whatever happened before you came here, I'm willing to listen." Levi hesitated, the weight of his secrets suddenly exhausting to bear alone. He looked at Hannah, whose expression held no fear or judgment, only concern. 3 years ago in Wyoming, he began slowly. "My brother Thomas and I had a small ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough to build something of our own. A gang of rustlers hit us one night. Thomas was killed. I tracked them down, recognized the leader as a man named Wade Caldwell, a local rancher who tried to buy our land multiple times." He paused, the memories still sharp and painful. "Before I could bring him to justice, I was ambushed, knocked unconscious. When I came to, Caldwell was dead, shot with my gun, and his men were telling the sheriff I'd murdered him in cold blood over a land dispute." "You were framed," Hannah said softly. Levi nodded grimly. "There's still a bounty for my arrest in Wyoming territory. Not large enough to bring professional hunters, but enough that I can't stay anywhere too long. Sooner or later, someone recognizes me or starts asking questions. Now Harker knows, and he'll use it." Donovan was silent for a long moment. "Do you have any proof of your innocence?" "Nothing but my word," Levi admitted. "The men who framed me are still running Caldwell's operation. Without them confessing, I'm still a wanted man." Hannah stepped forward decisively. "Then we need to clear your name." Levi gave a bitter laugh. "Just like that? Ride into Wyoming and politely ask the men who murdered my brother to confess they framed me?" "No," she replied seriously. "But my father is a judge in Boston with connections throughout the territories. If we can gather enough evidence of your character, testimonials from people who know you, perhaps affidavits regarding Caldwell's attempts to take your land, we might be able to petition for a review of your case." "Hannah," Donovan cautioned, "this isn't some legal puzzle in your father's study. These are dangerous men." "I know that," she insisted. "But I also know that running isn't a solution. It's just postponing the inevitable." She turned to Levi, her expression softening. "You can't build a life always looking over your shoulder, always ready to abandon everything at the first sign of trouble. Her words struck at the heart of the philosophy that had governed his existence for 3 years. The idea of fighting back, of clearing his name rather than simply evading capture, had seemed impossible for so long that he'd stopped considering it. Even if I wanted to, he said slowly, I can't risk staying. Not with Harker knowing. He'll spread the word, maybe even contact authorities in Wyoming. Then we move quickly, Hannah replied. I can write to my father tonight. In the meantime, she looked at her uncle meaningfully. Donovan sighed heavily. In the meantime, I still need my best hand. The North Pasture Line shack is isolated enough. You can stay there while we sort this out. He fixed Levi with a stern look. Unless you're still determined to run. Levi looked between them, these people offering help when they should be showing him the door. Especially Hannah, whose determination to believe in him defied all logic. Something warm and unfamiliar unfurled in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the dangerous beginning of trust. Why would you do this? He asked Hannah directly. You barely know me. Her answer was simple, but delivered with such conviction that it left him momentarily speechless. Because everyone deserves a second chance, especially those who've never had a proper first one. That night, as Levi settled into the Spartan Line shack 5 miles from the main ranch house, he found himself unable to sleep. Hannah's words echoed in his mind, challenging the careful detachment he'd cultivated. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that survival meant isolation, that connections were liabilities. Yet here he was, accepting help, allowing others to shoulder his burden. The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo of cautious hope and constant vigilance. True to his word, Harker had begun spreading rumors about Levi's past, though the details grew increasingly exaggerated with each telling. Fortunately, Donovan's standing in the community meant few took Harker's claims seriously without proof. Hannah threw herself into building Levi's case with remarkable determination. She wrote not only to her father but to contacts throughout the territories, searching for witnesses who might have known Caldwell, for documentation of his land-grabbing tactics, for anything that might support Levi's account. Despite Donovan's insistence that Levi remain at the line shack, Hannah visited regularly, bringing supplies, news, and sometimes just conversation. At first, these visits were strictly business, discussions of legal strategies and updates on her correspondence. But gradually, their talks extended to other topics. Her life in Boston, his childhood in Pennsylvania, books they'd both read, dreams they'd once held. On a particularly mild day in early March, Hannah arrived on horseback, her cheeks flushed with excitement and exertion. I've had word from my father, she announced as she dismounted. He's contacted a federal marshal who's willing to review your case. Apparently, there have been other complaints about the Caldwell operation over the years, nothing that stuck, but enough to establish a pattern. Levi, who had been mending tack outside the cabin, set aside his work. That's unexpected good news. She smiled broadly. There's more. One of Caldwell's former hands has come forward, a man named Pritchard. He left the outfit shortly after your brother's murder, moved to Idaho. Says he's willing to testify that Caldwell ordered the rustling and later framed you for his death. For the first time in 3 years, Levi felt the weight on his shoulders lighten marginally. Why would he come forward now? Conscience, perhaps, Hannah suggested, tying her horse to the hitching post. Or maybe he's simply tired of carrying secrets. My father says he's a family man now, with children of his own. She joined Levi on the rough-hewn bench outside the cabin, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, a jarringly refined scent in the rustic surroundings. The proximity stirred feelings he'd been fighting to ignore. If this works, he said carefully, if my name is cleared. What, then? Hannah looked at him curiously. What do you mean? For 3 years, surviving has been my only goal. Running, hiding, staying one step ahead. I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else. Her expression softened with understanding. You start by allowing yourself to want things again. A home, purpose, connections with others. She hesitated, then added more softly. The things most people take for granted. And if I'm not sure what I want anymore. She held his gaze steadily. Then you give yourself time to discover it. Without looking over your shoulder. Without planning your next escape. The simplicity of her answer, the gentle certainty in her voice, moved something deep within him. Before he could think better of it, Levi reached out and took her hand in his. It was the first time he'd initiated any contact between them, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for everything he felt. "For believing me. For helping." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. "You're a good man, Levi Irwin. Despite everything that's happened to you." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Levi knew he should release her hand, maintain the careful distance that propriety and his own uncertain future demanded. Instead, he found himself drawing closer, his free hand moving to gently touch her cheek. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. For a suspended moment, it seemed the entire Montana wilderness held its breath with them. The crack of a rifle shattered the silence. Levi reacted instantly, pulling Hannah to the ground and covering her body with his as a second shot splintered the wood of the cabin wall behind them. "Inside," he ordered, already reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. They scrambled into the cabin as a third shot kicked up dirt at their heels. Once inside, Levi positioned Hannah behind the solid oak table, which he quickly overturned to provide additional cover. "Stay down," he instructed, moving to the window to assess their situation. 2 riders, possibly 3, were positioned in the trees about 100 yards from the cabin. Too far for an accurate shot with a pistol, but well within rifle range. "Harker?" Hannah asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the danger. "Can't tell," Levi replied, scanning the tree line. "But it's a safe bet. Uncle Edward was expecting me back by sundown. When I don't return, he'll send men to look for us." Levi nodded grimly. "That gives us a few hours to hold out." He checked his ammunition, enough for a sustained defense if they were careful. "Can you shoot that?" he asked, indicating the second rifle mounted on the wall. Hannah's answer was to retrieve the weapon and check its loading with practiced efficiency. "My father believed every educated woman should know how to defend herself," she explained at his surprised look. "Especially one planning to visit the frontier." A small smile tugged at Levi's mouth despite the gravity of their situation. "You continue to surprise me, Hannah Forrester." Another shot hit the cabin, this one lower and to the left of the window. Their attackers were attempting to find angles of fire that might catch them unprotected. "They're trying to draw us out," Levi observed. "Or keep us pinned down until dark. What do we do? Wait. Conserve ammunition. Take careful shots if they advance." He positioned himself at the window again. "And hope your uncle notices your absence sooner rather than later." The afternoon stretched into a tense stalemate. Occasional shots hit the cabin, but their attackers seemed content to wait them out rather than risk a direct assault. Levi and Hannah took turns watching the approaches, speaking in low voices to conserve energy and maintain focus. As the light began to fade, Levi's concern grew. If Harker and his men hadn't retreated by nightfall, their chances of overrunning the cabin would improve significantly. He was considering options for getting Hannah safely away when she suddenly gripped his arm. "Movement," she whispered, pointing toward the eastern approach. "They're advancing." Levi saw them immediately. 3 figures, using the growing shadows and the uneven terrain for cover as they closed the distance to the cabin. "Take the back window," he instructed Hannah. "Shoot if they get within 50 yards, but don't expose yourself unnecessarily." She nodded grimly and moved into position, her earlier fear now replaced by focused determination. Levi centered his sights on the lead figure, now recognizable as Harker himself. The man was either overconfident or desperate, advancing with less caution than the situation warranted. When he was within 70 yards, Levi squeezed the trigger. The shot wasn't meant to kill, just to warn. It kicked up dirt inches from Harker's feet, stopping his advance instantly. The other 2 men immediately dropped to the ground, seeking whatever cover they could find. "Next one won't be a warning," Levi called into the gathering dusk. "Turn around and ride out, Harker. Whatever you're hoping to gain here isn't worth dying for." Harker's response was a string of curses followed by a wild shot that went wide of the cabin. "You're a dead man, Irwin. Bounty or no bounty." Another voice joined the exchange, one of Harker's companions, sounding considerably less committed to the confrontation. "This has gone far enough, Jeb. Shooting at a woman? This ain't what I signed on for." "Shut your mouth, Parker." Harker snarled. "We finish this, or I finish you." The internal conflict among the attackers gave Levi a moment of hope. If Harker's men were wavering, the standoff might end without further bloodshed. That hope evaporated when Harker fired again, this time with better aim. The bullet splintered the window frame inches from Levi's head, sending wooden shards flying. "Levi!" Hannah's alarmed voice called from the back of the cabin. "I'm fine," he assured her, though he felt a warm trickle of blood where a splinter had grazed his temple. "Stay at your post." But Hannah was already moving toward him, concern overriding caution. As she reached his side, a shot shattered the glass of the window she'd just abandoned. The realization of how close she'd come to serious injury sent a cold wave of fear through Levi, not for himself, but for her. In that moment, the truth he'd been fighting for weeks became undeniable. He cared for Hannah Forrester deeply and irrevocably. And because of him, she was now in mortal danger. "I'm sorry," he said roughly, pulling her away from the broken window. "I should never have let you stay. This is my fight, not yours." "Don't you understand yet?" she replied, her green eyes fierce in the dimming light. "Your fights became my fights the moment I chose to help you. That's what it means to care for someone." Before Levi could respond to this declaration, the unmistakable sound of multiple riders approaching from the north cut through the tension. Harker and his men heard it too, their curses and hurried movements visible even in the gathering darkness. "That'll be Uncle Edward," Hannah said, relief evident in her voice. Sure enough, moments later, Donovan's authoritative voice called out, "Harker, you and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons." There was a tense silence, then the clatter of a rifle hitting the ground, followed by another. Harker, however, wasn't surrendering so easily. "This ain't over," he shouted, and the sound of a horse being spurred into a gallop followed immediately. Several shots rang out from Donovan's men, but in the near darkness, accurate aim was impossible. Harker escaped, though his companions were quickly apprehended. When Donovan entered the cabin minutes later, he found Hannah and Levi still standing close together, the intensity of the past hours evident in their expressions. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, looking between them with concern. "We're fine," Hannah assured him, though her eyes remained on Levi's bloodied temple. "Though Mr. Irwin could use some attention for that cut." Donovan nodded grimly. "Harker got away, but we have his men. They're talking already, trying to save their own skins. Seems Harker was planning to take you to Wyoming himself. Levi, collect the bounty and settle some perceived slight all at once." "And now?" Levi asked, the question heavy with implications for his future. "Now we get you both safely back to the ranch and accelerate our plans to clear your name," Donovan replied firmly. "Harker's actions today have only strengthened our position. Attempting to kidnap or kill a man based on an unproven bounty won't sit well with any judge, territorial or federal." As they prepared to leave the cabin, Hannah took Levi's hand again, this time with a new certainty. "We're going to fix this," she promised. "And then you're going to have to decide what you really want." The look she gave him left little doubt about her own desires, and for the first time in years, Levi allowed himself to hope for something beyond mere survival. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity. Hannah's father, Judge James Forrester, used his considerable influence to expedite the review of Levi's case. The federal marshal arrived from Helena to take statements, not only from Levi but from Donovan and other local ranchers who could attest to his character. Most significantly, Pritchard, the former Caldwell hand, provided a detailed account of the events surrounding Thomas Irwin's murder and the subsequent framing of his brother. Harker remained at large, but his companions' testimonies about his plot to capture Levi for the bounty only strengthened the case for a formal review. By mid-April, word came from Wyoming Territory. In light of new evidence, the charges against Levi Irwin had been dismissed. The bounty was rescinded, and the territorial governor had issued a formal apology for the miscarriage of justice. Levi received the news with a stunned disbelief that gradually gave way to a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in 3 years, he could look to the future without the shadow of his past hanging over every decision. The celebration at the Donovan Ranch that evening was subdued but heartfelt. The hands raised glasses to Levi's vindication, and Donovan himself offered a toast to justice long overdue. Throughout it all, Hannah remained at Levi's side, her quiet pride and happiness a balm to his still processing mind. As the celebration wound down, she slipped her hand into his and led him out onto the porch, away from the others. The April night was cool but clear, Stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. How does it feel? She asked softly. To be free. Levi considered the question, searching for words to express the tangle of emotions within him. Unfamiliar, he finally admitted. Like waking from a long nightmare to find the world has changed while you were sleeping. She nodded understanding. And now that you're awake? What will you do? It was the question he'd been both anticipating and dreading. For weeks, they'd existed in a strange limbo, their growing feelings for each other acknowledged but deliberately set aside while they focused on clearing his name. Now, with that goal accomplished, the future stretched before them, full of possibilities and decisions. I've been thinking about that, he said slowly. For so long, my only plan was to keep moving, to stay ahead of the past. Now that I can stop running. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Hannah, I don't have much to offer. No land, no fortune, not even many possessions. But if you'd allow it, I'd like to build something here. Something permanent. Her eyes widened with understanding. Here? At the ranch. Your uncle mentioned this morning that with his expanding operation, he's been considering taking on a partner. Someone who knows cattle and can help manage the growing herd. Levi's voice grew more confident as he continued. I have some savings, not much, but enough for a modest stake. With time and work, I could build something worthwhile. Something to be proud of. And is that all you want to build? Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A business partnership with my uncle? Levi stepped closer, releasing her hands to gently frame her face. No, he said simply. That's not all. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative with the newness of expressed feelings, then deepening with the release of emotions long held in check. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Hannah's smile could have outshone the stars above them. I was beginning to think you'd never do that, she teased, though her eyes were serious. I've wanted to since that day at the line shack, he admitted. Before the shooting started. She laughed softly. Our timing could use some improvement. His expression grew more serious. Hannah, are you certain about this? About me? Your life in Boston was just a life, she interrupted firmly. This, she gestured between them, is where I want to be. Who I want to be with. I knew it weeks ago, though I suspect I've been falling in love with you since that first day on the wagon, when you were so determined to keep me at arm's length. The word love sent a jolt through Levi's system, both terrifying and exhilarating. He denied himself the possibility for so long that hearing it spoken aloud seemed almost unreal. I love you too, he said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on his lips. I think I've been fighting it since the moment you stood on that porch with a rifle, claiming this land as yours. Her smile turned mischievous. Our land now, it seems. The following morning, Levi sought out Edward Donovan in his study. The conversation was straightforward. Levi's proposal to invest his savings in the ranch operation in exchange for a partnership, his intentions toward Hannah made clear with respectful directness. Donovan, to Levi's relief, seemed neither surprised nor opposed to either proposal. I've seen the way you look at my niece, the older man said with a knowing smile. And more importantly, I've seen how she looks at you. As for the partnership, he extended his hand. I'd be proud to build this ranch with a man of your character, Levi. Spring bloomed across the Montana landscape, bringing with it new life and renewed purpose. The cattle were moved to summer pastures, calves were branded, and plans were made for expanding the operation come fall. Throughout it all, Levi found himself looking to the future with an eagerness he'd thought lost forever. In late May, as wildflowers painted the valley in a riot of colors, Levi took Hannah riding to a ridge overlooking the northern section of the ranch. It was a spot he'd discovered during his solitary patrols, a place where the majesty of the Montana Territory spread out in all directions. Mountains to the west, rolling plains to the east, and the silvery ribbon of the river cutting through the heart of the valley. They dismounted, and Levi spread a blanket on a patch of grass sheltered by a stand of pines. From his saddlebag, he produced a simple lunch, bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of wine that Mrs. Cooper had insisted he take. It's beautiful here, Hannah said, taking in the panoramic view. I can see why you chose it. Levi settled beside her, his nervousness hidden beneath a calm exterior. I thought you might like it. But that's not the only reason I brought you here. She looked at him curiously, accepting the cup of wine he offered. Oh, Taking a deep breath, Levi reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring with a modest diamond at its center. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks," he admitted, the ring catching the sunlight as he held it between them, waiting for the right moment, the right words. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "I spent 3 years convinced that survival meant isolation," Levi continued, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "That caring for someone, building something lasting, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Then you came into my life with your determination and your belief in second chances, and you showed me how wrong I was." He took her hand gently. "Hannah Forster, I love you. I want to build a life with you. Right here, on this land, in this place that finally feels like home because you're in it. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Levi Irwin." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Levi felt the last of his long-held barriers crumble away. The man who had drifted for 3 years, keeping everyone at a distance, was gone. In his place stood a man who had found his second chance, in a woman's unwavering belief, in a community's acceptance, in his own courage to finally stop running and start building. They were married in August, in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch staff and many from the surrounding community. Judge Forster traveled from Boston to officiate, bringing with him Hannah's mother and younger sister. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the star-filled Montana sky. As summer gave way to fall, Levi and Hannah moved into the small house that had been built for them near the main ranch building, close enough for convenience, but separate enough for privacy. Together, they faced the challenges of ranch life: early frosts, difficult calving, the constant work of maintaining and improving the land. But unlike the hardships of his past, Levi no longer faced these trials alone. One evening in late October, as the first snow of the season dusted the distant mountains, they sat together on their porch, Hannah wrapped in a blanket against the growing chill, Levi's arm around her shoulders. "I had a letter from my father today," she said, leaning into his embrace. "He says Pritchard's testimony has led to the arrest of 2 of Caldwell's former men. They've confessed to their role in framing you." Levi nodded, the news bringing a sense of closure rather than the sharp pain such reminders once caused. "Justice comes in its own time, I suppose." "Speaking of time," Hannah said, a new note in her voice that caught his attention immediately. "I visited Dr. Matthews in town yesterday." He turned to look at her, concern immediate. "Are you unwell? Why didn't you tell me?" Her smile was mysterious, her eyes shining with barely contained excitement. "Not unwell. Just changing. We both are, actually. Our family, that is." Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. "Hannah, are you saying?" "Come spring," she confirmed, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "There will be one more Irwin on this ranch." The surge of emotion that swept through Levi was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, a potent mixture of joy, wonder, and a fierce protective love that took his breath away. In that moment, the transformation that had begun the day Hannah Forster stepped off the stagecoach was complete. The lost cowboy who had drifted through life, keeping his distance from anything that might cause pain, was gone forever. In his place stood a husband, a rancher, a man with roots deep in the Montana soil, and soon, a father. A man who had found not just a second chance at life, but a second chance at love, at family, at belonging. As the first snowflakes began to fall around them, Levi pulled Hannah closer and pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, looking up at him with love clear in her eyes. "For believing in second chances," he replied simply, "and for giving me mine." Together, they watched the snow begin to blanket the land that was now truly their home, the future stretching before them as vast and full of promise as the Montana sky above.